Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all really well. You're all most welcome to this 9th session in the Keeping the Dream Alive series by the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage, My Travel Research and Low Season Traveller. I'd also like to give a very special welcome to all of our World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage members and supporters. Obviously, we can't do anything without you guys' support. Before we get started, a few general housekeeping rules, as always. You're all on mute to avoid background noise, but please do use the chat function to let us know that you're here. Please do also send us through any questions which you've got for today's speaker via the questions function, which you should see on your GoToWebinar toolbar. We'll aim to get through as many questions as we possibly can, but please do use this area for specific questions to the speaker rather than general comments, because that way we can make sure that we can sort through all of the questions and get through as many as we possibly can. If you do have any comments or observations during the session, please do use the comments box, and again we'll go through and read some of those out as well in the Q&A session. All sessions will be recorded, and we'll send out the links to the recordings shortly after each session. We'll also release the Q&A from each session as a podcast on the Low Season Traveller Insider Guides podcast series, which you can find on iTunes, Spotify, and the wetac.org website, where you'll also find the entire session with Tammy Marshall from last Thursday, as well as every other session so far. So, as I mentioned, this is the 9th session in a series of 12 where we're hearing from global experts in the fields of marketing and communications, tourism data, aviation, hospitality, and much more. So please do sign up to the whole series and also feel free to share the links with your friends and industry colleagues. Finally, we can't provide any of these sessions without the very kind and generous support of our partners in this series. So a huge thanks to all of our partners, which you can see listed on the screen here. So for those of you that don't know me, let me introduce myself properly. My name's Jed Brown, and I'm the founder of Low Season Traveller and also the Managing Director EMEA of the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage. And it's my honour to be your moderator and MC for this entire series. This 9th episode is entitled The Opportunities and Advantages of Data Marketing, and we're delighted to have the perfect speaker for this subject today. Luke is Commercial Director at Tourist Tracker and has more than 17 years professional experience working with search engine marketing, data and technology companies. Passionate about the industry, Luke values insight, creativity and technology in equal measure, ensuring an innovative approach to developing data and technology-led strategic solutions. Luke's presentation will explore the challenges of travel marketing during the COVID-19 recovery and how data and technology can help brands to create seamless customer experiences across all media channels and devices. Luke's session will focus particularly on personalization within the booking process and how to follow that up with the traveler experience while consuming the end product. A very good afternoon to you, Luke. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and welcome to the Tourism Expert Recovery Series.
Thanks very much for having me. And thanks very much for the introduction.
There you go. Well, I'll leave you to it, Luke. I'll back out now.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, everyone, for having me along. It's really fantastic to be invited along to speak at one of these webinars. Obviously, we're all going through a tough time right now, and especially over the last couple of months, whereby we've seen, because of reasons outside of our control, tourism numbers, our businesses completely go into hibernation. Having been in this position for a couple of months, we're now starting to see the green shoots come out the other side. And when I was starting to research, I guess what information was out there and available for this presentation, one of the reports I came across was the Reboot Australia report. Now, it is specific to Australia, but I think there are some learnings that can be taken away from there for any region or any business as we come out of the COVID hibernation. And one of the interesting points I saw in that was the suggestion that businesses, or in our case destinations, that really embrace digital technologies and cloud-based technologies are going to do significantly better in terms of scaling in terms of customer acquisition as we move forward out of this phase. The reason why this piqued my interest is because at the end of the day, to really align with digital transformation, digital customer acquisition, or even utilize cloud-based technologies for personalization, we really need data to sort of fuel that, because it is the thing that suggests the better the data is that goes in, the better the outcome or output there's going to be, and therefore the better you're going to be able to acquire customers and get back on track. So to give you a bit about background about myself, I've been in the digital sector, I guess, for the past 18 or so years, specifically within technology and data for the last 10 years. And over the last 3 or so years, I've been working with numerous different travel and tourism clients, specifically focusing on travel data. But today, and just making sure you can, there we go. Today, I'm going to speak to you primarily around why most consumer data advice does not work for the travel and tourism industry. And the reason why I think this is so important is because at the end of the day, everybody who's worked in this sector is going to be affected by COVID. So it's not just operators, it's not just accommodation providers, it's not just airlines, etc. It's going to be the likes of data vendors. And every data vendor or advertising vendor or agency or platform that comes to you and says, I can help you get the business, your business up and running, and I can get the most profitable return for you in the short term, is going to suggest that they have the best data set out there for you. So what you really need to be able to do when you walk away from this presentation today, and I promise you it's not going to be in-depth, heavy, numerical focus or anything like that, but what we want to do is give you 3 or 4 things to walk away with to give you confidence, no matter where your understanding is of data acquisition right now, to be able to ask these vendors to qualify whether or not the data set they are utilizing or they are selling is appropriate for your business or your product or your destination. But to sort of give you an idea as to why I've come to this position, I think we should start with looking at the sort of the data I've found best that has worked for me in the past. And the first thing I want you to take away from this presentation is this term, deterministic. Deterministic is a label we give to a specific type of data. Deterministic, as the name suggests, indicates that something can be determined from that data set. So for instance, if I went to the Qantas website and I searched for a flight from Sydney to Melbourne, you could determine that I was in market to travel to Melbourne. If you could take out a data touch point there that suggested that I was traveling on the 14th of July, you again would be able to determine that I was traveling on that date. So you can start to see deterministic data is a factual data set. On the flip side, there's a data set or a label we give to a data set called probabilistic. And as the name suggests again, it means that something is probably happening. It means we've inferred or drawn a line between 2 touch points, and that's the way in which we've classified what this consumer or what this user is doing. So to give you an example of that, probabilistic data could include if I go to a website about Melbourne nightlife, Melbourne restaurants, or something like that. You could infer that I was interested in, going out in Melbourne, eating out in Melbourne, and then some vendors will actually say, well, because Luke has gone and researched this content and it's contextually relevant to someone who might travel to that destination, that he is therefore in market. The reality is that might be the case now, it might be the case in 6 months' time. There's no real knowing on when that's going to happen or if it will ever happen at all. So it's a probabilistic data set. That's why I only use, when my marketing, deterministic data sets. And to give you an idea of what they are and the touch points that I utilize frequent flyer loyalty program touch points. I utilize device ID touch points. Now, a device ID is connected to your mobile phone. It allows us to track dispersal when someone flies into a region. So it's really great for destinations in that regards. I'll give you an example. If you're the tourism body across a state and you've got one main entry point via air, and if we took South Australia, for instance, Adelaide is the major entry point if you're coming in by commercial aircraft, But what you need to do as an organization is actually move people around the state as well. Being able to measure these people moving around the state by the fact that we can track device IDs enables us to really have an idea of what impact our marketing and media activity is having. It's not just getting someone to book, it's not just getting them to the entry point, it's really being able to ingest that information and make analysis of it, so that therefore we can optimize our go-to-market strategy to get the best possible return moving forward. Another type of deterministic data would be credit card analysis or financial investment analysis. So what I do is I bring in these three types of data sets and layer them over the top. And what I can do is I can segment up the audience based on what I can learn from their declared information, which is deterministic within the frequent flyer program. I can understand when they're traveling because I can match that back to the behavioral information they'll do within the Qantas own assets or the airline's own assets. I can then follow them around when they get into the actual regional destination, and I can allocate the spend that they're doing within that particular region with the credit card analysis at a deterministic level to have a true idea of what the impact my marketing and media strategy has been delivering. So things to keep in mind: deterministic data is great. Deterministic data is GDPR compliant as long as it's not personally identifying and it meets all those rules. So that process we went through in the last sort of 6 to 12 months in making sure that we are aligned to and compliant with the GDPR recommendations or legislation that came out of Europe is absolutely critical, but this data set will allow you to do that. And therefore, it gives you a true picture on what's happening and the ability to optimize as you need to moving forward. So that's why I believe we should utilize those data sets. But to visualize that for you and to give you a real world example of who might be able to use this, let's use a commercial partner at this time. Say it's an airline. If this was an airline and this is Kate, who's the traveler. Kate's traveling, she's got a ticket from Brisbane to Adelaide, and all we really know about her from the airline perspective who's sold this ticket to her is that she's traveling in economy. They'll know the dates she's traveling and they will know the fare class she's on. But what if the airline had known more about Kate before she was actually converted and purchased that particular product? Perhaps they might know, that she's a frequent business traveler, that she stays at business class hotels, that she rents luxury vehicles. We might also know that she's got 3 kids, she's an international traveler and takes them to Pacific every year, and that she searches on online travel agencies. So she does have some brand or a loyalty, but cost is still a big thing to her. If this airline had known more about Kate before they put a creative in front of her or before they put an ad in front of her in order to be able to convert her, they may have been able to build a better emotional connection with Kate, converted her at a higher yield, and therefore also be able to drive that loyalty to make them the preferred brand moving forward. It could be as simple as understanding that she's a business traveler and needs a flexible ticket rather than a sale ticket. It might be that she travels to the Pacific every year with her kids. So how do we make sure that the creative that we're delivering to Kate around the time that she usually takes her annual holiday is targeted towards not just her, but her and her family and a family-based offer? These are the things that we can really start to build out if we have the right data set to become more personalized in our customer acquisition, but also be more personalized when it comes to actually consuming that particular product. And I'll go into that a bit more as we go along. But if you think this sounds very advanced, if you think this sounds quite sophisticated, and if you think you're behind the curve in actually putting this into implementation and making sure you're getting the most from your marketing and media dollars, I think we need to have a look back at the past and see what we were doing pre-COVID. Because I have to say, no one out there at scale is doing this consistently at the perfect level. And the reason for that is when we start to look at creative like this. These are 4 destinations that have very, very similar creative. Now, this creative looks great and appealing, but there's nothing personalized about it. There's nothing that says to Luke, well, one of these stands out because we know what you're after before you've asked for it, and we can deliver on that. or we can deliver on the experience that you're into because we know more about you. And it doesn't have to be creepy in the way we do it, but it just has to build that emotional connection with the consumer, because when you build that emotional connection with the consumer, they're far more likely to convert in a shorter possible time and do so at a higher investment. And at the end of the day, when we come out of the COVID-19 hibernation, we're going to need every marketing dollar we've got to work as hard as it possibly can for us, because budgets are going to be finite, and therefore we really need to be able to show that return on advertiser spend. But it's not just destinations, it's our commercial partners as well. These are 4 hotel rooms and actually 4 creative that I have been served previously. Now I've taken the logos off them, so it's not showing who each individual brand is, but these could be anywhere in Australia or the world for that matter. They could be in any city. And when I look at these, there's no real differentiator between them. They all serve the purpose I need for right now, which you'd expect, which is a bed for the night, but there's nothing additional that draws me to one particular brand or another. And when we start to look at that, we start to really purchase on price. And when we purchase on price, it's a bit of a race to the bottom. It's not great if you win, and it's terrible if you lose. So how do we build that emotional connection by knowing more about our consumer to not only personalize targeting them, the acquisition of that particular consumer, but also then giving a really personalized experience based on what we know of them. And I'll give you an example of that and how a hotel chain has done that for me. My partner and I like to go to Bali about once a year. Just a long weekend. It's a very easy trip here from Sydney. But one of the things that's always annoyed me about traveling in general is not being able to check in or check out of my hotel room with ease whenever I want to. So when you go to Bali from Sydney, you fly in, you arrive at the night. If you fly in the after work flight, it's check in straight away, no dramas there. It comes at the other end of the holiday. It comes at the time when you have to check out around midday, 1 o'clock, when your flight might not be to 10 p.m. that evening. I used to get annoyed that I have to buy an additional day or hope like hell I could get a late checkout. But that was until one hotel group targeted me, having bought a deterministic data set for which I was part of. They knew that I was landing in the evening, but they also knew that I was flying back on a red-eye flight. They then were able to serve me up creative that enabled me to have a 24-hour check-in, check-out policy. Now, what that meant is that when I checked in, the clock started running on the day that I had purchased. So on the day we were leaving, I didn't have to check out until 8 p.m. in the evening, and our flight was at 10:30. It worked absolutely perfectly for me. That was something that I needed that I hadn't told the brand I needed yet, and they'd been able to personalize that creative for me. I purchased that immediately. Sure, the hotel chain had put a premium on buying that, but that didn't worry me at all, because at the end of the day, all I wanted to do was be able to facilitate the want and need I had to make sure I had a greater experience of not just the accommodations, but the entire holiday itself. And therefore, it meant that I go back to Bali every time, and I continually purchase at that particular hotel. Now, you might be thinking, how does this work with occupancy? If Luke's checking out late one day, does this put risk at having that hotel have an empty room night? And the reality is it doesn't. Because this deterministic data set continually refreshes on a daily basis, that hotel chain was able to then target someone coming in on the same flight that I did just on the day I was leaving. So in essence, they were able to increase their yield on that particular room for the stay that I was there and for the stay that the next person was in there, through doing nothing else but being more strategic with their personalization strategy by utilizing the right data set to be able to get the right customer who was prepared to pay more, and therefore pay more often as they do so moving forward. But it's not just hotels, it's the airline industry as well. We don't have anything more than a lot of generic creative out there at the moment. And if we're going to win coming out of the COVID-19 hibernation shutdown, we really need to engage in that emotional connection with the consumer by using the right data set. So what would you do? How do you do this? Who do you ask? What are the questions that you need to be able to make sure that you've got the right data set? And there are 3 key points here that I want you to take away from this particular presentation if you take nothing else away. The first one is transparency. You need to know where the data comes from to determine whether or not it's going to be the right data for you. And let me give you some examples of that. If someone comes to you and you're a hotel chain and they say, oh, we've got the data you absolutely need and this is going to help you scale, what you should be asking is, where did you get that data from? If you're a hotel chain, the best data out there would most likely be airline data, because it enables you to see when people are arriving in your particular destination. For that transparency piece, you also need to know additional data points like length of stay, date arrival, date departure, class of travel, because all of these things enable you to therefore segment up and really stringently hone in on the type of creative you're going to put forward to a particular individual to make sure that they understand the type of offering you have, and also make sure you get the product in front of them that's going to yield the highest possible for them. So transparency is the first thing you need to ask from your data providers. Secondly, you need to understand whether or not you can verify this data. And what I mean by verification is, how do we determine that this data set is actually in market right now? It's no good if someone comes along to you and says, I've got a fantastic pool, we've got great audience for you that we can target for your destination, if those people have already traveled to it and left in the last month. We need to be able to make sure that it's in the future. We need to be able to understand what the search to book and the advanced purchase windows are going to be on these particular people, so that therefore we can give you the best possible opportunity to convert that individual at the highest possible rate. And the third thing I want you to take away from this is that the data has to be activated in real time. There's no point if you've got transparency and understand that this data set is the data set you want to take away and it's made up of the data points that you absolutely need. It's no point that if it's the right data and it's in the future and you understand when that person is due to travel to your region, if we can't get an ad in front of it at the right time to make sure that they've got the best possible opportunity to convert. You can't sell a hotel room tonight by putting an ad in front of someone in 3 days' time. There's no point if you're looking to drive a visitation to a particular destination in the next month by having them arrive or have the ability to travel 3 months' time from now. What you need to understand is that you can get the right message in front of the right user at the right time to personalize the offer, engage with them at an emotional level, and therefore have them buy into what you're actually selling. So there are the three things: transparency, number one, verification, and activation in real time. If you ask those three questions, you'll be able to determine that the data set you have is going to be the data set that you want to use moving forward. So the key takeaway from this is simply that not all data is created equal. You do have your probabilistic data. That's not going to work well if you're looking to sell stuff and sell it now. You've got to make sure that it's transparent, you've got to make sure that it's verified, and you've got to make sure that you can activate it in real time. Of course, on top of this, it's interesting to take note that the data set that you need is not the data set that your competitors are going to need. It's not the data set that destinations in your region are going to need if you're selling a commercial product. It's going to be different based on the products that you have, based on the price point that you're at, and based on the target audience that you're looking to engage with. So the takeaway from here: transparency, verification, activation in real time. Deterministic data is the best data set you're going to have. Not all data is created equal. And just to bear in mind that cheap data is not going to be great data. Really good data is going to perform 5, 6, 10 times better than just a regular probabilistic model. So to make sure that you are getting the data set you need, it's going to have a price associated with it that is representative of that. But it will return a much higher return on advertiser spend than you would do through using cheap and nasty stuff, which there is plenty of that out there. And on that note, I will hand back over to you, Jed, for Q&A.
Perfect. Thanks a million for that, Luke. really interesting stuff to sort of dig through and pick over there. And obviously, would invite the audience at this stage to start putting in their questions. Generally speaking, look, there's a lot of data out there. There's more than we've ever had previously. What should people be looking for in a data set to start their recovery process? On a budget, you're talking about, cheap data is worthless data. People are on a budget, they haven't got huge amounts of cash to spend. What should they be looking for in terms of data?
Well, one thing you have to look at is who was converting on your product previously. And we need to really delve into that, right? Who was our target audience? And a lot of the time we look at who our target audience is, and it's made up of what we believe it is, rather than looking at the analysis that we can have. There's age ranges in there that we'll be able to take away. There's origins that are in there. And there needs to be also an idea of what you want to target. If you've got a product which, let's take accommodation for an example. If you're looking to, in the recovery phase, to have people pay more and stay longer, we need to look at who paid more and stayed longer previously and start building models out from there. Once we have those attributes, then we can start to look at the data vendors out there and work out which data set is going to be best for us. It's not a matter of saying, oh, I've got this property and it needs to be full all the time. What we want to do is get people paying at the highest possible yield point for us and staying for the longest possible time. We need a data vendor that can find those people based on the analysis we've done of our previous customer base to be able to therefore enable us to convert those new customers.
Yeah, so a huge amount of this really is knowing who your key customer base is first, and knowing the profile of that customer base, and then getting the most appropriate data provider and data sets that will allow you to target them, I suppose, in a more personal way.
Exactly. And when we start to talking about personalized ways as well, it's not just that, okay, we understand this target audience, it's going to be all one call to action or all one creative. I really do encourage brands to test, A/B test against different data sets, see what's working best, optimize on the fly. All of this can be done fairly simply through utilizing technology platforms. Now, they're not necessarily a barrier to entry, but I know that they can be daunting to a lot of advertisers. So making sure you know a brief understanding of those particular technologies so that you can implement things like dynamic creative optimization to get the most impact from your marketing dollars is going to go significantly further for you than leaving it up to someone else to say that we've got the best data set for you and give us the creative and off we go.
Fair point. I was really interested when you were talking about your barley example, and I think, look, many of us on this particular session have had similar circumstances, and I'm just sort of thinking to myself as you were going through your circumstance, I was thinking I've been there before as well, and it's massively frustrating because in many ways the hotel part of the traveller journey, it does seem to be broken, and I was sort of reflecting really as you were talking about the amount of data that the hotel groups have got and the different hotels that they don't seem to use. When I'm booking a hotel, whether it be Bali or anywhere else, I give them my name, my address, email, credit card, because we need to take a deposit and everything else. And as soon as I rock up, jet lagged to hell, the first thing I have to do is fill out exactly the information which they've already received. And it's massively frustrating. Is there a challenge with a lot of organizations actually not using the data that they've got already efficiently?
Absolutely. And I think one of the big things with this is, okay, it drives a lot of wastage. If I know all of this about my previous customer base, if I can communicate with these customers on a one-to-one level at the cheapest possible way, which might be through a direct mail, electronic direct mail or something like that, why is it that I'm then putting money aside for someone to go out and prospect these clients over and over again? Being able to utilize that information, be able to therefore personalize the EDM that goes out so that it's not just a one size fits all, being able to communicate at a reasonable level that doesn't come across as creepy with these particular customers or previous customers, because you know so much about them, is so critical for you and will be, one would think, the first step in a COVID recovery marketing plan moving forward. but making sure that it's not just a single blast of the same offer or the same call to action or the same information to every single client is critical, because the engagement you will receive will be significantly higher if you segment that up. You have different offering, even if it's different call to action for the same offer or the same product, you will get a greater return based on engagement from that particular owned base that you wouldn't need to then go out and prospect again. So utilizing that data set is going to be absolutely critical. Then being able to do incremental sort of washes, and this is something that you can do down the path. If you've got a CRM database and someone wants to sell you a data set and they say it's, you know, transparent and all that type of stuff, being able to wash and rinse out the audience that you're already talking to so that you're only buying incremental reach, that's going to be useful for you as well, and everyone should be doing that. Again, comes across as a slightly daunting task, but it's really not that difficult once you get your head around it, and it will ensure that you're constantly filling the top of the funnel to make sure you're increasing your known audience, so that therefore you can communicate with these people on an ongoing basis.
And then you talked in there about GDPR and the importance of GDPR. Just for anybody that's watching this that isn't as familiar with GDPR, just give us an overview of what GDPR is and why do we need to know about GDPR?
So GDPR is the General Data Privacy Regulation that came out of the European Union, and it's the reason for anyone that hasn't heard of it before. You might have noticed about 12 months ago, every brand on earth that you've ever communicated with sent you an email saying they'd updated their privacy statement. It's essentially a legislation that makes sure that the data that is collected by brands is used ethically and used in a way in which ensures privacy of the individual and can only be utilized with explicit permissions of that particular individual. Now, not being a lawyer myself, I wouldn't give any sort of legal advice on this, other than to say that it's something that you definitely have to be aware of in 2020. It's going to become more apparent over different regions throughout the world as more governments start to bring in general data privacy regulation. There is one in California at the moment that's being enacted. There's probably going to be one in Australia and New Zealand, I would say, over the next 2-3 years, but it will spread around the globe. As long as you're adhering to the most stringent regulation, which at the moment is GDPR, you'll be absolutely fine in any market you work in.
Fair point. Good for everyone to know. Right, some questions starting to come through now, Luke. How do you feel about using digital behavior, and how would this impact my marketing dollars?
So digital behavior is absolutely something that I would be utilizing. And when I was talking about the first party data sets previously, I kind of said that there was, you know, I use loyalty loyalty programs, but I matched that with digital behaviors as well. So if I've got Luke sitting here who's in 5 or 6 loyalty programs, because, you know, we call them loyalty programs, but you've got about 5 or 6 on the go at any one time. What we really need to do is layer that with intent digital behavior. So has Luke been to this airline's website and searched for a flight to which destination, or has Luke been to a hotel site and searched for a room on a X particular night? Utilizing that intent data and that digital behavior is critical to know when someone is actually in market. It sort of goes to that point I was saying around verification. It's great to have someone who travels regularly, but if you don't know that they're in market right now, are they the lowest hanging fruit? Are they the most valuable target for you right this second?
Is that and again, I think you touched on this in the presentation with regards to using data for tourism dispersal. You know, I think the example you gave was Adelaide, and you know how many people, or we can find out how many people arrived into Adelaide, and the key question is, where do they go from there? So is that as well used for, I suppose, market share information? So if you're a hotelier or some kind of a tourism operator in South Australia, would you gain some semblance using these kind of data sets as to, and it was through mobile data, wasn't it? I think you'll get an understanding of what your market share is. So if you've got a property in South Australia and you know the profile of the clientele which you usually get, and competitors, do do you use that for market share? Is that how that can be utilized?
You definitely know who's moving into your region, and you can work it based on your bookings or whatever it might be to figure out that market share piece. But one thing I would say is that it also gives you an indication of how popular your region is, on what the average spend is to your region and what the average length of stay is to your region. So if your clientele are coming in and only staying one night, but what you're seeing is the average length of stay for your region being 3 nights, there's an opportunity for you immediately to increase the number of nights stayed, reduce the number of actual visitors or guests that you have, but in turn, that should hit your bottom line in a positive way, because you're not turning people over on every day, and they're given more opportunity to actually spend money whilst they're actually consuming the product.
Yep. Super. Back to the questions. Question, Luke, your Bali hotel example indicated the right approach by that brand for your needs there. Was this done at the hotel level, do you know, from the booking system you used, e.g. OTA travel agent, or did it come from a brand corporate action? If local, that was always possible with ancient systems that has ARR and departure times, arrival and departure times, but it would be good to know who pulled the right lever for you. And that's from Kevin Murphy.
Yeah, so there's a number of players out there that have deterministic data sets, right? In Australia, you have your Adaras, you have your Sojourns, you have your tourist trackers. It all depends on who or what makes up their data set. So in the instance that I was traveling on an Australian carrier, so it was one of the players that had that particular data set. Now, the hotel, and I spoke to the marketing guy there, that's why I know this. It's not like I could pick this up from actually being served the ad, but I was quite interested to find out how he'd actually managed to target us and whether that was intentional or just by random chance. And it was intentional. And basically what they said was they were looking to service the Australian traveller coming to Bali. They wanted to make sure that they could offer a point of difference. And so that they were utilising one of those data players within the market, and it was incremental. I'd never engaged with this property beforehand, so they were actually, because they served me that ad, I then went and converted on their website. The ARR and all of that information is possible, but I understand that the latency that comes with that, and that goes back to my third point of it needs to be activated in real time. Being able to understand that someone's booked a flight within the last 24 hours but has not booked accommodations means that you've got a bleeding neck to sort of purchase that particular product there and then. And that's what these data providers do, because it's activated in real time. It's delivering up the audience that you need, or the audience that is appropriate for your product. And being able to do that enabled them to convert me right there and then within 24 hours of booking the flight.
Yeah, slick. Question come in from Damien on WhatsApp. Are you able to accurately determine the ROI on your advertising dollars, as this would be a massive advantage in planning future marketing activity?
Yeah, absolutely. So you are able to accurately determine it based on, I guess, the data providers that you have out there. No one player has 100% coverage of every accommodation vendor or every airline or every car rental company or whatever it might be. But what you need to do is be able to see the impact that your marketing or media has had on, at scale, and be able to extrapolate that out over your entire media plan. So if you're only getting sort of 20%, I guess, analysis over the marketplace, you're not necessarily going to be able to extrapolate that out to 100% to say, well, my return on advertiser spend is going to be 10 to 1, 20 to 1. What we need is to be able to understand that we can get a decent sample size based on exposure to that particular creative. So what we do is we put a tag into the creative, the digital creative. It's served up to Luke. Luke's exposed to it. He might have 3 or 4 frequency. So he sees the ad 3 or 4 times over a period of time, and then goes and books on a particular website. That is direct correlation attribution. But of course, there's going to be times when you might be a destination and Luke has served 3 or 4 ads, and then he goes and books on an accommodation vendor's site that is not necessarily feeding back information into the analysis that you're actually pulling. So we need to make sure we've got a decent sample size so we can extrapolate that out over the full time. And I wouldn't call it ROI, I'd probably call it return on advertiser spend, because of course there are other factors that come in when it comes to the return on investment.
Well, we talk about a decent sample size. What is a credible sample size? Because there's so many different data sets out there. We know that when they do electoral polls, they're incredibly accurate, and their sample size is actually it's really small. It's 5% or less. What is, in your experience, what is a credible sample size?
So if you can get around the 28 to 32% mark, I think that's quite good. I know that's probably larger than the polls that you're talking about there. But what we do there is we're looking at, okay, that is what an OTA is generally there or thereabouts, sort of in that, that 25 to 32% range. When you look at the data vendors out there that have airlines across a jurisdiction, they generally have one airline and probably two or three chains of accommodation vendors. So it starts to give you enough analysis there to be confident in the information you're getting back. It's when you only have, say, one particular property in a destination, that's not going to be enough information to say, okay, well, this is what we're actually effectively driving. Or even if you're in somewhere like the US and you're only getting information through from one airline chain, given there's such a number of airlines over there, it's not going to give you an accurate enough picture. So we need to have, and it's going to differ by, I guess, population size and players in the market as well. New A, there's only one hotel, that's going to be fine, right? But anywhere else in the world, you're going to need a greater sort of sample size to be able to accurately get that analysis come through.
And then in terms of the sources of the data, will that vary, I guess, by source market? If we're talking about international tourism, you might have an OTA player which is by far got the market share in, I don't know, India or Indonesia. Is that how you sort of target then the right sort of data sets? You look at each particular source market that your client is looking to attract?
Absolutely.
Is there a one size fits all as well? Is there a one size fits all? Is there any sort of data set that actually's got it for, if I'm interested in attracting the Indonesian market, the Thai market, the Japan market, the China market, is there a magic set of data that kind of has it all covered?
Unfortunately not, and the four markets you just gave them are probably the most different out of all of them, because just the sophistication levels, even things like access to broadband or access to 4G. You look at somewhere like Indonesia, rising middle class, 250 million people, but we're only starting to see the adoption of smartphones in the last sort of 3 to 5 years. Prior to that, it's been, your stock standard, and not even Androids, but your Nokias and things like that. So how do we make sure that the data set we're pulling is not only accurate based on the coverage of the OTA or the data vendor within that particular country, but also the access to that particular property, if you like, from the general population, to make sure that the data coming through is going to be sufficient for you to meet. And you are going to have to work with different data partners in different parts of the world, and multinational brands do that all the time. Unfortunately, there is no one size fits all.
Okay, is that part of the is that part of the service that Tourist Tracker then provides, helping people to unpick, the types of data which actually would be the most beneficial for them? Because that's it, because it is a minefield. I mean, there is just so many different sources out there, and who of us, unless we are an absolute data expert, which we're not, we're tourism experts, who of us knows which is the right piece of data or data set which we require? Is that actually kind of where you guys come in, right?
Yeah, so one of the things we do from an engagement perspective is it's a strategic approach where we look at who are the current customers based on what we have actually seen over the past 12 months, because we see about 13-month look back window. What is your targeting strategy at the moment, and where is the opportunity there to optimize based on what you think you should be targeting, and what we really need to target based on building lookalikes of who's actually consumed the product, and then how do we segment custom segment up those audiences to be able to activate on immediately, so you've got that lowest hanging fruit. So we're really bringing in that, we understand who the audience is based on what the data is telling us, not what you think or what we've been told. how do we segment that up, and then how do we overlay that with the intent data right now to make sure that we're putting your creative in front of the right user at the right time to get the best possible conversion.
I really love that. The what you're sort of alluding to there is, again, it's this, we've seen the hashtag facts over fear when we're talking about data quite a lot, but it's facts over emotions as well. When you're a business owner, like you were saying, you feel that X, Y, and Z is happening, but actually the data might be telling you a very different story, and actually the data is what you need to believe in, because that's the stuff that's accurate, right?
Absolutely, it's not lying to you.
Yep, love it. Carolyn, at this point, I'd like to invite you up to join us. And see if we've got any more questions from the audience, because I haven't had a chance to have a look. Oh, well, there is quite a few questions from the audience by the looks of it. Oh, can't hear you.
Most people normally think that's a good thing.
I need to get one of those signs that you've got, Carolyn.
Yes, yes, my very high-tech "I can't hear you" sign. But thankfully, Luke has lived up to his reputation as a data and guru and not had any of those technical problems so far. I think another question on GDPR rules has come in from Nigel, and it's: do GDPR rules and regulations significantly restrict the ability for accurate data to be collected and used effectively, particularly people who are opting out? For example, does that mean I'm unlikely ever to receive a truly tailored piece of communication?
No, it hasn't. It hasn't sort of played out that way. That was one of the fears when GDPR came in, because it had to be an opt-in. But what you will notice, if you go to any airline's website right now, their terms and conditions state that they collect cookies and they'll use that for marketing purposes. You can opt out at that stage. We haven't seen the majority of people do that. There is a very slow or very minute opt-out rate. So what we found is that people who are actually continuing to opt in are generally your higher value customers. We're already weeding out what we don't want and what we don't need, because people aren't interested in the product after their one consumption of it. So if you go to Singapore Airlines website and you look at their terms and conditions, you are opting in by doing a search. You are opting in by making a booking. At any stage you can opt out so that you can't be marketed to, but it's not been an issue where we've seen significant scale of the data collected having been sidelined because people have chosen to opt out.
Okay, great. I think I saw some numbers that even only 15% of millennials opt out from any kind of list anywhere or any kind of cookies. So I think we've just really done that trade, haven't we, Luke, where we've kind of gone convenience over privacy. I wonder if do you think that will change with what's happening with privacy during COVID-19? Do you think that will be an issue?
I don't think it will. And one of the things we're seeing right now is there's very much a content play, no matter who you are in the marketplace. So if you're an airline, there's a content play going on. If you're a masthead, a former newspaper masthead website, there's obviously the content play there. And instead of buying content these days, we're actually trading it off and buying it with our data. So to be able to consume that, there has to be a way for that brand to basically make cash. And the way in which they're doing that is by utilizing it for marketing purposes. Now, you say the millennials only 15% opting out. They've never really had it any other way. They don't really mind that much. And there's somewhat a theme of the belief out there that everything is out there anyway, so what does it matter? And I think GDPR is a stringent law which enables privacy to be upheld because it's non-personally identifying. It doesn't know that you're Carolyn. It just knows that you're profile X. And essentially, it knows that your behavior online has been Y, and that your declared information is this, so that therefore we can target you in a non-personal identifying way. And I think everyone's fairly comfortable with that. You do get people that will always be hypersensitive to it and want to opt out of everything and not be targeted for anything. That's their choice, and they've got the opportunity to do that. What we need to focus on is those people who are keen to hear more from us, but they want to hear more from us about what they're interested in. They want advertising that is relevant to them. They don't want to be bombarded with ED or electronic direct mail, which is just a one-size-fits-all every single day of the week just to keep the brand name out there. We've got to be strategic about how we utilize this, and I think if we do that, we're not going to see an issue with a mass opt-out of any data pools that we can actually target.
And that actually comes very nice to segue into Karen's question, who's our speaker next week, who's on Thursday, who's on here. Well, she's saying she has the issue you raised, which is all of this data people collect and then they don't use it. Do you think is Australia better or worse at that, or are we equally bad or good around the world at not personalizing or personalizing?
Oh, look, the technologies there to be able to personalize have been there for 15 years. We just need to become more efficient in doing it. Every marketer I kind of talk to, especially when we talk about how do we segment up the audience that we want to target and how do we make sure we personalize the creative that we deliver to them, or how do we deliver the EDM that's personalized to them, says yes, they want to be able to do it. If you see the surveys from every CMO that multiple brands do each year, it's always personalization is big on my list. We've got to start crossing that off the list by actually doing it and doing it more effectively. We've got the tools out there to be able to do it. Yes, it takes a little bit more time. Yes, it takes a little bit of time to set up. And yes, it costs a little bit more to be able to do. But if we set this up and we set the infrastructure up in a way in which it can be always on and optimized as we go along, even as people's behaviors change and their values change and whatnot, we've set it up for life. Essentially, we can make sure we're engaging with that consumer over the lifetime that they could consume the product and give us the best possible opportunity for them to stay loyal to us. Loyalty is the last part of the purchase funnel. You go through conversion, you can't stop there. Personalization moving forward from there is going to be key to make sure that we keep these people engaged with our brand.
Fantastic. We've actually got someone who's saying, can you briefly explain programmatic advertising and how that's being applied at the moment?
Sure. So programmatic advertising, and the best way to think about it is in the same way you would buy stocks on a stock exchange, right? We have these things called DSPs. They're essentially a place where it's a demand side platform. It's a place where you can buy inventory that is pumped in by websites from all across the world. What you can do at that point is actually wash data across the top of it. So you can utilize these technologies to understand a piece of inventory that's come up, washed with the data that we're after. Okay, it's the target we want. I'm going to bid on that at the market-based price, as you would do for a share. And you can purchase that in real time at that price. In the most, that's a very simplistic way of putting it, but that's kind of what we call programmatic advertising. It's just a way to buy dynamically, to wash your data sets over the top, to ensure you've got brand safety and viewability, and be able to buy at a market-based price. It's really good for always-on-based activity, and really good for your performance-based activity, your lower funnel activity. I do hesitate to say that it should be utilized for everything. There is always going to be a place to buy premium content or buy advertising space next to premium content. But I do say that when you're buying premium content, you shouldn't be buying it as a whole on a sponsorship or a one-size-fits-all, buying every piece of inventory available within that premium content. You need to wash your data set over the top of it as well. So you want to make sure that you're buying premium content with the correct target associated with that. Likewise, buying programmatic content, which is your performance-based activity, needs to be the right activity for you with the right inventory associated to it, so that therefore it's got the opportunity to convert for you at the quickest possible rate.
Great. Now, even more start at the beginning type question here for you, Luke. So Guy said, I'm a tour guide specializing in private guided chauffeur tours. How do I get into the system and be included in that data that an airline or a hotel has on clients? Where do you start? What's your very first step?
So there are a number, if you've got travel data out there, there are a number of players out there, depending on where you are in the world, that
He's in New Zealand.
Happily buy your data, right? So you've got Tourist Tracker, you've got Adara, you've got Sojourn, etc. This enables, if you go to one of their websites, they actually have a form where you'll be able to essentially list in what your website is. They'll be able to do some analysis on it, and basically the way in which that data is associated is that it gets added into the total co-op. It's anonymized. It's able to then be utilized to target particular travelers to that particular region, and therefore you're able to sort of benefit off it that way. So the first point of call for anything is to go to one of these data vendors, look onto their site, inquire in their form, and they'll be able to then point you in the right direction and how to be able to activate your data to make sure that not only you, but the region around you is getting the best possible opportunity to be able to target that consumer.
Great. A question from John, who was our third presenter. We have quite a few lag indicators in terms of data, lead indicators that you find most useful.
So asking the lead indicators I find most useful when targeting? Okay, cool. Yeah, so it depends on what the product is, right? As I said before, if you're a hotel chain, you want to be looking at flight data. We know in the majority of the world, but I can give you the stats from Australia that 69% of all hotel rooms are booked within 6 hours of a flight being booked. So that's a great indicator that someone's in market for it. If you're an airline, say, one thing we do know in my part of the world is that the search to book window starts about 7 days out for a flight, but before the flight is booked, about 2 days prior to that, you start to see accommodation searches take place. That is a great indicator on where to get in if you really want to do low, bottom of the funnel type performance-based marketing for an airline. That's when you want to start getting into the market. It really depends on what your product is. Car rentals, again, the lead indicator for these traditionally is it's a bit like travel insurance. It's kind of the last thing you book when you travel. It's either when you're at the airport before you take off or within the 24 hours before that. Duty-free or luxury brands tend to target people utilizing deterministic data sets when they're getting to the airport. So in the 24 hours leading up to that, because once you check in, you lose all rationale goes out your head and you start spending money like it's going out of fashion. That's why they all have a presence in duty-free. But by having that deterministic data set, you can start to put your brand in front of those people because you know they're going to be at an airport in the next 24 hours. So it depends on what the product is to being what the lead indicator is going to be. But having said that, again, it's kind of what I was saying before when we start to determine what is going to be the best data set for us. We need to know what the product is based on who's consumed it previously and when they've purchased it, and work backwards from there to figure out what data touch points we need.
Brilliant. Now, question from Matthew. So lots of data can just be noise if it's not analyzed. Is there a way for AI to minimize the effort of analysis, or is it always going to require a skilled analyst to determine what's relevant? We've got quite a few small businesses on the line, Luke. Assume would be a significant cost to a business.
Yeah, of course, and yes, the answer is yes. Essentially, what you want to be able to do, and this is kind of what I alluded to before in the past, especially when it came to the dynamic creative optimization. If we utilize the right tools, we can set and forget. Essentially, what we want to be able to do is set it up and set it up robustly so that we can just leave it and effectively get on with our day-to-day business, which is obviously delivering our product, but our marketing is taken care of because we've got optimization algorithms that are learning as we go forward. We always, when we start going to market, I always recommend you have 80% optimizing always on, 20% as just rotating throughout the ecosystem, because what that allows us to do is understand that when there are geopolitical shifts or economic downturns or whatever it might be, we are picking this up through the behavior of individuals, and it's adding to our optimization algorithms or our AI to be able to therefore make sure that we're optimizing at a rapid rate as well to be sure that we don't get caught out.
Okay, have you spotted any questions that I've missed, Jed, or that have come into you on the WhatsApp?
Yeah, no, just there was another good one which is actually quite relevant at the moment. Is, you know, we're talking about the acquisition of data, and a lot of this is historic data. Given the sort of the crisis that we've been through, the recovery changing hour by hour as well as day by day, how do people know that the data that they've bought yesterday will be, you know, of value today?
Yeah, so the one thing I'll do is look back 12 months. Who was the consumer that was converting the most out of the last 12 months? And by looking back 12 months, granted, this downturn has been sharp and it's been sudden, but we start to remove those statistical anomalies that come out of it, so that therefore we can start to look at the segmentation that we bought. Now, when you buy that segmentation or that data that's coming through, what you want to do is buy that from a vendor who's going to deliver it to you on a 24-hour cadence. Now, what do I mean by that? They push you through the data set, and it sits within the technology platform, but it's refreshed daily, so that anyone that's purchased or has converted elsewhere is dropped out, but anyone new coming into the top of the funnel is being pushed through to you as a new target. So we have the ability to do that. It goes to that verification piece I was talking about earlier. It's great that you've got this bundle of profiles that are in market to travel to Melbourne, but if I start targeting them tomorrow, will they have all traveled by tomorrow and come back at the end of the week when my campaign goes for the rest of the month? I need something that's being refreshed on a daily basis so that it can be activated in real time and so that we're getting the best possible outcome for our marketing dollars.
Yep, makes sense. Any other questions that have come through? Carolyn, did we go through?
I think we've got most of them. I think probably one just might get you to reconfirm, Luke. I think you've answered this, but the question, how can an individual hotel do this personalization, or is it just something where it goes to one of the big brand chains? Because I think there's probably still a lot of people who are very new to the world that you're talking about, not quite sure, well, can I really do this if I'm just a single hotel?
Absolutely, you can. And when you think about it, it doesn't have to be personalized down to the nth degree. It could be simply knowing that your traveler is a business traveler as opposed to a leisure traveler. It could be knowing when they're arriving in market, as I said before. It could be knowing there's a possibility of it's a couple or a family or whatever it might be, and just having different sort of calls to action or different creative based on that. That in itself is a fairly cheap process to do, but if you do that, you will start to see quicker engagement rates with those potential customers, higher conversion rates, and especially if you can start to tap into the value of that particular customer as well, being able to offer them the product that you have that is best suited to their ability to pay is going to return dividends for you down the track, because it means that your higher priced product is not necessarily going to sit empty simply because an individual who can afford to pay for it or is traveling for business and has a travel and expense account and they're paying for it, could have purchased it, but they were only served information surrounding what the rack rate was for the standard group.
Great. I wonder if it'd be possible for me to ask your opinion on something, Luke, because like I'm sure many people on this call, I looked at those competitive images that you put up and I absolutely went like this and put my hands over my eyes, which is, why is it that you think people keep using those very generic images that just, I mean, one thing I know I do in focus groups is I'll often cover up the logo as you've done and said, okay, tell me who it is. And of course, I think you'd struggle. Why is it you think people still revert to this very generic style of imaging?
I think it's because everyone is so time poor today. And, when you think about it, if you're a marketing manager or a brand manager, or if you're a single property, you've got so many things to do in your day that coming up with different creative or ensuring that we've got a different creative for this campaign or this segment or that segment is just adding more to your plate. And that's kind of what I was saying before. We need to get to a position where we're prepared to put time aside and go, I'm going to set this up and I'm going to set it up properly, because it's actually going to save me time and money in the long run if I do it correctly now. It might be, and those hotel images that I put up before, they were of major brands as well. You also get this directive of, the creative has to be approved by head office, but they don't understand the idiosyncrasies of a particular market or a particular segment. And we need to really empower people who work for us to be able to go out and do this, because they're looking at the data, they're understanding what it's saying to them, and they want to personalize based on that. But if we've got an intrinsic belief that no, one size fits all and this has always worked, then we're never going to get to the point where we're firing on all cylinders. We need to be open to change, but at the same time, we need to let the data actually inform that change.
Thank you. Any more questions? that have come in on the WhatsApp? There's nothing else on the question panel.
No,
or
nothing else. I
anything
mean,
you wanted to add?
Just on that, really, because I was like you, Carolyn, when we were looking at the photos of the hotels in particular, was one that's coming. Obviously, on the destinations, you are just thinking, how are they differentiating from each other? Because they do look all exactly the same. But on the hotels in particular, I find that fascinating. I've been spending a lot of time recently loading hotels onto my own website, and all of the photographs. You're absolutely right, Luke. That pretty much. It's all pretty much the same, yeah. And I know the hotels would be horrified at hearing that, but for the most part, it's a bed, there's a side table, it's just generic. And for me, I start to think that, maybe, we have an opportunity, and certainly the smaller guys have an opportunity to inject their personality a little bit more into their own unique brand and their ethos, and talk about their approach to the environment or anything else. That kind of stuff is going to set you aside, or the way in which your staff deal with the guests and look after the guests, that sets you aside. The pictures of the room, I mean, God, it's just like, I expect there to be a bed, I expect there to be a bathroom. That's the bare minimum. But isn't that the case with most hotels anyway? How can we differentiate between any given hotel room? I've stayed in hundreds over the past year, and I couldn't pick out one room over another as to what it looks like right now. It's insane.
I actually still tell the tale of a regional Australia trip I took, where I was the 5th motel in a row, and I woke up in the middle of the night and I actually had a panic attack because I didn't know where I was. There was nothing in that room that said I'm in a place.
Yeah, ridiculous. Look, before we let you go, Luke, what's your advice for our audience as to your top sort of 2 or 3 takeaways that they can take away from this session to improve their marketing efforts moving forward, so that they can have the best possible impact with regards to data and the recovery?
Yes, and it kind of goes. This kind of goes back to what I've been repeating throughout, sort of even the questions that came through, right? If we look at what everyone's telling us about coming out of COVID-19 hibernation, and we need to embrace digital first narratives, and we need to embrace technology. What we need to really fuel that technology is the best possible data set. So if you go back to those 3 key points I said: transparency, understand what makes up the data set, understand where it comes from, and if it's relevant to your product. Verify it, make sure that the data set is for the future, not the past. It's all well good to look at people who've traveled here and try and re-engage them, absolutely. But if we're trying to fill the top of the funnel and really trying to work on performance-based activity and sell our product now, we need to look at people who are interested in traveling in the near future. And then on top of that, make sure it's activated in real time. It's great if it's all verified and they're ready to travel, but if we can't get an ad in front of them before that to actually convince them and drive them to consider our product, then it's all going to be a waste of time anyway. So transparency, verification, real-time activation, and just remember that what you are after for your data set is not necessarily going to be the data set that your competitors are using, and that's absolutely fine, because you have your unique selling product, and that's the emotional connection you're going to have with your particular customer.
Perfect. On that note, Luke, thank you so much for giving us your time today and your insights, which have been really appreciated. Fascinating stuff. Thanks a million to our audience for all of your questions and for spending time with us today. We'll be posting up the webinar of this particular session online on the WeTAC group pages on LinkedIn and Facebook later this evening, as well as on YouTube and everywhere else. And just to remind you all, please do join us for our 10th episode in this series, which will be this Thursday, where we'll hear from Karen Priest from Tourism Talent, who indeed is online, who'll be talking to us about the role of HR as we emerge from the shadow of COVID-19. So that's this Thursday at the same time as usual. I'd now like to ask Chris Flynn to join us up here to give us his closing remarks. Chris, are you there?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Jed. Hey, Luke, that was fantastic, mate. But I knew it would be. For those of you listening, Luke and I have been, or I've been lucky enough to work with Luke on a number of occasions, and I've learned so much from him. It's been amazing. What I found when I started to work with Luke was I found all of this very confusing, in fact, terrifying to some degree, because it seemed so alien to what I was used to. But with Luke's guidance, I started to get my head around it, and it really is, the most efficient way of marketing and getting your message out there. Would I be right in saying that, Luke?
Yeah, I think so. At the moment, definitely, especially with our budgets that are moving forward are going to be finite. We need to be able to show a return on every dollar spent. So if we can get that low-hanging fruit because we know more about the consumer, we know that they have money to spend because we've got the information through from the analysis we've done on credit card expenditure or whatever it might be, and then that they've got leave or they've got the ability to travel right now, that is what we're going to have to be able to target for first and foremost, because at the end of the day, we need people through the door on the first day we're allowed to start traveling again.
Following on from that, if we were to look at predictive analysis for when a destination is starting to turn, and then we overlay the probabilistic data that you were talking about, that must give you an advantage in determining when to spend your marketing dollars, how to position it, what market segment you want to actually attract, what kind of individuals you want to attract. So the combination of those data sets has to give a destination, a brand, a product a significant advantage, because of course recovery is going to be sporadic.
That's correct, and we're starting to see that now, right? So even if I take, for instance, in Australia, we have seen about a profile bucket of about 980,000 people in the last 30 days searching from overseas travel. Now, they're searching to different destinations, but at the end of the day, they're ready to travel. We don't have borders open in Australia, and we're probably not going to have them open for some time. So does that offer a low-hanging fruit for destinations to be able to target those individuals by promoting their particular, I guess, offering for people who are ready to travel right now? Likewise, we're starting to see, even domestic travel in Australia and New Zealand, we're starting to see search volumes pick up. So if you're looking for the NT, the Northern Territory here in Australia, we're starting to see that pick up because it's seen as being a kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And because these traditional international travelers who go and spend billions of dollars outside the region every year are looking to travel, they're looking at these type of destinations. We're looking at remote places. We're looking at places that you wouldn't necessarily have suggested previously. So although it might not be search volume to your particular destination simply because it's probably lesser known or for whatever reason, we are seeing search volume start to pick up. So therefore, this is an audience for you to be able to really hone in and target, especially if you can segment it down, as you said, to by the segment type, by the individual, and by the experience that they're likely to have there.
Yeah, Luke, absolutely fantastic. I'm very grateful for you supporting the series and for the information that you've given to us. And all being well, we'll get to catch up soon when things start to sort of ease up a little bit. So I really do appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed, and I'll see you soon, I hope. Just thanks before I wrap up, you're welcome. Thanks, mate. Just before I wrap up, I'd just like to thank all our members, all our supporters, all our followers. As Jed said, we couldn't do this without you. So very grateful for all your support, and please keep it coming. Jed, are you there?
Oh, I am. There you are.
Okay. I'll leave you to wrap up.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks a million, Chris. Yeah, so as Chris said, thanks again to all of our sponsors and supporters, which you can hopefully see here on the screen just now. You can't, but we'll share them with you anyway. Please do visit their websites and give them any support that you can. We couldn't do it without them. This series has been hosted by me, Jed Brown of Low Season Traveller, and the producer has been Carolyn Childs of My Travel Research. Have a great day and a great evening, everybody, and we'll see you all for the next session on Thursday. All the best.